All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the CRE Playbook, your weekly spot for deals, strategies, and tips to level up your real estate investing game. I'm Carl Krauskopf, thrilled to be here, and I've got a great guest today, Nick Klein with Bellevue Capital Group. I am absolutely thrilled to have him. We've done business together, good friend, and what I'm really excited about to talk is get you guys into his story, learn a little bit more about what he's done and doing at the Bellevue Capital Group, as well as talking a little bit more about the debt situation, the debt horizon, the outlook for 2024 and the out years. Right, have been in unprecedented rate hike increases through 2023. We're in early 24 right now, and we've had whisperings, and obviously the Fed themselves have talked about rate cuts through 2024. So would love to get some of Nick's perspective on that. But real quick, as an intro, Nick is the Chief Operating Officer at Bellevue Capital Group. He's been the driving force behind the company's remarkable growth and expansion. His strategic leadership has not only contributed to the success of the organization, but has also empowered numerous clients, one of which has been myself, right? Scaling and enhancing our business portfolios through innovative commercial financing solutions. Nick, welcome. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your partnership.
Hi, everybody. Oh, nice to meet y'all. Carl, thanks for having me. It's been a good journey, and hopefully it continues at the pace we've been going. And I've always been a big believer in learning by doing, and I think it's invaluable knowledge you get when you live it yourself. So a little bit about me. I think, like so many people, I started with that purple and gold book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, back when I was in high school. And so rather than going straight to college, I kind of went right into the real world. Having gotten my real estate broker's license at the ripe age of 19, I actually sold my first house before I could drink a beer. So that was an interesting experience. So I did that for a number of years. Worked up to where I was working with Capstone Homes, representing their development sites. And then my family, with being my brother and father, we got into fixing and flipping homes, doing some investment properties. And then 2007, we got into a multifamily project in upstate New York, of all places. So it's like, you might as well jump into the deep end and, go right for it. That was
and impeccable timing too, right?
Oh yeah, it was I use that example of everything that you shouldn't do in terms of an investment. Far out of state into one of the more litigious states in the union, and you just jumped into the deep end. We had contractors stealing from us and billing us for other projects they took the supplies to. So we had to deal with that. We had 3 property managers we had to fire, 2 of which we had to sue. You name it. I think that was very much a real life learning experience of all the different ways in which trusting people too much can cost you. So eventually we learned all our lessons and we fixed our managed operation, and a big believer of boots on the ground. And so the strategy we came up with was you just empower good, normal people to be site managers. That's how we did it. And then we take control of the financial management. So, now it's in-house. We always have control of financial management. And so all rents were collected online. I was in charge of all the bookkeeping type stuff. And actually most normal people are good human beings. They want to do a good job. So you pay the site manager, better than they typically would make, and they'll treat you great. So we turned that asset around, we repositioned it, and ended up being a success. 1031 that into another larger complex in Washington. Totally renovated that, did the same thing, and now we own a surgery center with big multinational tenants. And it's ironic that as you climb up the food chain, it actually gets easier. So the asset we have now takes very little effort, and it produces 10 times what the other ones did. But without going through the journey of experience of getting there, it's like we wouldn't have been qualified to understand how to manage that asset either, So it's very much a learn by doing. Of course, so then coming out of 2009 with the crash in real estate, went back to University of Washington and kind of retooled, got a degree in political science and economics. So the study of money and policy, which shapes money, because I was so frustrated that I didn't see 2009 coming. I felt blindsided by what happened in the Great Recession. So I kind of vowed to myself I wanted to understand what's happening, how this all works. And so I think that education really helped me view things differently. Coming out of that, University of Washington, I worked with Summerfield Commercial, and I revamped their management division. And so they were in a kind of a 1980s, everything was paperwork. So I moved them to a fully integrated digital process. So everything from lease application to, management to check cutting, everything was digital by the time I left. And oversaw about 200 million of real estate, had 40 plus people under me there. And again, real hand experiences of how to manage these assets, how to hire, how action from boots on the ground translates into economic performance for your clients. And so I think that real life hands-on experience was invaluable. And that's part of what led me to be qualified to help start Bellevue Capital Group with our founder and CEO, Faraz Rohani. And so 6 years ago, we started Bellevue Capital Group with a focus on commercial finance. And since then, we've grown to having done over about $1.5 billion in commercial loans so far. And, our rate of acceleration continues. Last year was a challenging year, but we still did about 380 million in commercial loans, which is a little less than we typically like to see. But a lot of banks just weren't lending last year. So, it was challenging to find a deal structure that would work for the customer and that, the lender will actually close, because, you can cause harm to your customers if, as they purchase assets, they can have large earnest monies. They can hand those deposits can go non-refundable as the timeline, gets drawn out for them to continue to keep the deal alive. And the unfortunate truth of last year is most lenders were scrutinizing things so much that every timeline, every transaction got stretched out. And so the nerve-wracking part would start to come in where, you're really worried, like this lender better follow through and close, because my client's got, 200 grand non-refundable sitting out there. And, you never want to be the reason a customer loses money. So thankfully we navigated last year pretty well, and knock on wood, we closed the vast majority of the loans for people that we took on. So I think this might be a good segue as to kind of where we're at now and what we see coming into 2024.
But before we jump into that,
I guess I'll dive into my talk.
I'd love to hear that. One quick question is on your backing up into the story. I know we talked about the New York property earlier this week. I had a question that I think guests would absolutely stand to get a lot of value from you is why did you go out of state? First off, why did you go out of state? And then how did you find out the issues were going about, right? Whatever had happened. You mentioned there was theft involved. What did that look like? How did you discover it? And then how did you right size, or how did you rectify the situation and essentially turn the ship around? Especially, I mean, given you were right in the midst of the great financial crisis at that point, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there was a lot going on there. So, well, it's interesting. It's sometimes the universe presents opportunities, and sometimes it's opportunities to learn, sometimes it's opportunities to make money. So, we did a lot of learning on that one.
To go hand in hand, right?
Hopefully both. No, because I was a licensed broker and we had gotten profiled by an investment group because we were fixing and flipping properties at the time. And so a company, RealSource, had reached out to us back in 2006. So we went to one of their seminars and got to meet the folks there. And they identified 7 growth markets around the country that had different economic drivers. And, it was probably our lack of seasoning in commercial real estate at the time that led us to select the New York location.
Sure.
And we could have selected something a bit closer, kind of Midwest area, which I think, looking back, would have been a better move. But the reason why was some of the economic fundamental drivers. So what this group did is they looked at the life cycle clock. If you look at, like, imagine the cycle of real estate as a clock, 12 o'clock, being the peak of when you want to sell, and 6 o'clock being when you want to buy. What they looked at is the fundamental economic drivers of a community where, they've been getting depressed for a long time. Properties have gotten run down. Jobs moved away. But then what happens is something changes, right? The government comes up with a bunch of money to say, hey, let's revitalize this part of town. They come up with a lot of economic programs. Most recently it's been the opportunity funds, but
yep.
This was prior to that, situation, right? So what we identified is it was the city of Syracuse. It was predominantly a very successful city in the early 1900s. They were kind of where the first vehicles were produced. It's a 2-hour drive north of New York City, so it's close to the actual city. It's up there by Rochester and some of the higher income areas. So, but it's also close to the College of Syracuse, which has a good basketball team, by the way. But I digress. So we bought right next to Carousel Mall there, which had about $2 billion of government funding associated to it. And they were going to redevelop the whole area, including, tearing down, dilapidated houses that were in the neighborhood we bought in, fixing up the roads. Like, it was a massive infrastructure project. And when we toured out there, we saw it happening. You saw the big construction pilings going into the ground to expand the mall. You saw a lot of the bridges being improved. And I'm like, okay, this is really happening. And so we bought 2 blocks away from that situation, which was a good driving force for redevelopment. Well, what we didn't plan on was the 2008, Great Recession. So we bought in there and we basically renovated this 10-unit, and extensively. To be crass, there was a lot of tenants that had to be evicted.
Yep.
When we bought the place, there was, it was pretty rough. I don't need to go into detail, but it was pretty rough. So we put new siding on all through the building. We extended the roof because it snows up there, and this roof had a flat roof, so we put a pitched roof on it. As we opened up and did bathroom remodels, we realized in a few of them they'd actually rotted out, so we had to jack up the roof, take those walls out, and actually rebuild the exterior walls. So along the way, and I say we because even though we hired contractors, because things went so poorly there, we actually had to fly out there and take shifts. So I personally spent probably 3-4 months out there, doing labor and making sure that these units got turned and things got fixed. And so my brother took about a 6-month shift out there, and then my dad worked for his day job was for the military, and he'd built up a lot of paid savings. So he went out there for every year for at least a month, and used up all his paid time off out there. So this went on now for, a good 5 years to reposition the asset. And we, by the time we were done, every square inch of that thing was beautiful.
Yep.
And we even had pitched the city. There was, we were able to add an 11th unit in the basement that was an unused space. And so we won an initiative with the city of Syracuse to do that, even though the political climate out there was to go the other direction, because they didn't want these landlords to chop up houses, because a lot of that had happened out there, and they were trying to revitalize that part of town. So they wanted good, like, single family homes, and not just a high density chopped up housing rental neighborhood. But they saw the quality of effort we put into revitalizing the structure, so they granted us the ability to do that. So I think that was the turning point for us, being able to add that 11th unit. It changed the economic drivers. So our NOI looked good enough that we got a decent sales price on the other side of this. So fast forward, 5 years, and eventually we got over the Great Recession, and the funding started back up for the mall. So they did finally finish the mall, but it took a lot longer than we thought. We thought we'd get in there, renovate this thing, hold it for 2-3 years, sell. And I think the hold on that, it was almost 9 years. It was it was a rough one, but along the way, we learned every single thing that we shouldn't do.
Yep.
So we got those out of the way. And by the end of it, we had a system in place that actually worked very well. We had a cleaned up property. The neighborhood had turned. A lot of the bad drug houses were removed, and it was clean. City of Syracuse, it was near a lake too. The lake had been poisoned with mercury from the auto industry back in the day. And they actually, believe it or not, the University of Syracuse came up with a solution, and they cleaned the lake. They had some sort of technology where they were able to dredge the bottom of the lake and was able to capture the mercury. And so they removed all of it from the lake, and fish started living in there again. And
Nice.
And so now it's actually a fully revitalized lake. And so, it's actually, I think, turned into a nice community now. But so as everything turned around, we finally sold the building, and we ended up making about 250, 300% profit on it. But it was the most challenging return on a deal I've ever had. And when you physically are there doing every step, you can appreciate what it takes to get there. And so again, when I kind of made the joke, I've always been a big believer in learn by doing. You can read everything in a book. I read all the Rich Dad Poor Dad stuff. I read all the Carlton Sheet stuff. I read all those things, but there's no replacing the experience of boots on the ground.
Right.
And you got to live it, I feel like, to really be able to anticipate how to manage it right,
For sure. So it sounds like ROI, return on investment, was great, but maybe ROT, return on time, was certainly not.
No,
not there.
It was rough. Yeah.
Yep.
But thankfully, we stuck in there. We had the resilience to navigate all that, and ended up being a good thing in the end.
Great.
So then we repeated that with a 26 unit out in Monroe, but that was the whole time was about 3.5, 4 years, and we made 250% ROI on that one as well. So that was more. We did everything that we learned from the first one.
There you go.
We did it correctly on the second one. So
I think that's obviously the important thing, is being able to take your mistakes, your lessons learned, and really set them up in constant improvement. Ideally you're doing some big transformational improvements, but at minimum start taking those 1% rule every day, getting 1% better every day. So that's good, man. Well, anyway, I appreciate you diving into that. And let's jump back into current day, right? You were going to get into our 2024 outlook. What's your perspective, especially given last year's slowdown in transactions, and your perspective and outlook for 2024?
Yeah. So in order to kind of put context into 24, I think a brief summary of what my observations of 23. So we'll start there. A lot of the big banks just stopped lending. They didn't advertise it, but like try to go to Chase Bank, US Bank, and get a loan in 23. They weren't lending. And we picked up a lot of good customers. One of our customers, worth $90 million, has $20 million cash on hand, was building an industrial deal, historically worked with US Bank. They wouldn't give him a loan. I'm like, a super strong borrower building the whole structure that he's trying to build is only 15 million. He's got 20 million cash. He could just fund it from cash if he wanted to. US Bank couldn't get there. So what was happening is a lot of the big banks just weren't lending. They were very cautious of the environment. So the lenders that kind of stepped in, a lot of the deals we did went to smaller credit unions, local banks, banks that actually had borrower deposits that they were lending. So their source of capital was different, if you will, versus coming from securitizing loans or the FHLB or the Treasury. A lot of their funds were coming from deposits. And so what started happening towards the second half of 23 was banks really put a huge push on deposit relationships, because in order for them to lend, they needed to increase their deposits. And so that kind of became the single most important variable with customers, was how much deposits they're willing to bring over and form a relationship with these local lenders. And if so, then they were able to get reasonable deals done. in a market where rates were pushing 8% at times, we were still getting our clients high sixes with those deposit relationships, sometimes, low sevens. If there wasn't a deposit relationship, then it was 7.5% to 8% all day long from across the board. And then a lot of lenders just weren't lending. And so the challenge was making sure we actually got the customer aligned with a lender that will close the loan to not put them in hardship. So there was a lot of like, oh, great, look at the pricing from this bank. It's like, yeah, but that's not the main driver anymore. It used to be, but the real driver last year was, can they actually close? Because as we talked earlier on, it could really put a client into hardship if it drags them through the mud for 6 months and then the credit team says, never mind. And that did happen last year, which, more than it ever has in my time in finance. So, or in real estate.
How does a borrower get a sense of that? Obviously, you as an intermediary, are going to do your due diligence on the lender as well. But is there anything that as a borrower, as the team, the client can do on the front end to help source vet these potential lending relationships?
That was, I think, the most challenging part of last year, because banks don't want to advertise the fact that they're in trouble. And so, I would always interview them saying, hey, what's your liquidity position? And again, this is rolling back to the Trump era rollback of the Frank-Dodd Act, where they could lower their reserves from 20% to 10%. And that was only allowed for the small to regional banks to be more competitive with the national big banks. So national big banks, ironically, they never deviated from that 20% reserve. So that most of them were in good shape. But a lot of the regional ones, were low on their liquidity reserves. And then with the rates going up and they're, them essentially being upside down on 3% loans they've lent out, and their cost of funds going up to 5 to 5.5%, the bank was looking at being upside down. So a lot of them had to reposition. I don't want to name names, but there's quite a few community lenders that got visited, got on the get well plan from the FDIC. Yep. So I know several banks where they were getting visits from those guys. Just, quarterly check-ins, how you doing? Thankfully, a lot of the banks we know have kind of climbed out of that now, but and that's why the big push for deposits. But very unusual time, and I'm glad that the Fed stepped in and bailed out, Silicon Valley Bank and those guys, and honored the borrower deposits, because had they not been, this would have cascaded much further. Because there's a lot of other banks that were teetering. So I, kudos to the government. They finally did something right. That was, I think, doing that move actually salvaged the industry. And but that, that leads to where I think the Fed doesn't, again, you never know. I can't predict the future. I don't have a crystal ball, but my educated guess is that's part of what's leading the pressure for the Fed to drop rates earlier than they expected, because those liquidity loans that they made to those banks were a 1-year term. They come due in March. And so I think the Fed's a little bit in a pickle. They have to make the cost of borrowing less. Otherwise, they could they could end up in a position where these banks are in default against the bailout loan they did from when Silicon Valley and the others collapsed. So it's this pickle. What do you do? Keep rates high for inflation, or lower rates because you need to put the banks in a position where they have some hope of servicing that debt and staying in good standing. Because otherwise that could create the cascading event they were trying to avoid, right? So I think, with the Fed statement, they're planning on coming down around 0.5 point in March. I think that's likely to happen. I don't think they really have a choice. Otherwise, we're all going to have bigger problems. So that's just my opinion of the pieces I've kind of scraped together. Again, every time I think I'm 100% sure something in the market's going to happen, I'm wrong. So I always keep a little bit of room for, maybe it doesn't go that way, but I think all signs are pointing to that's the likely outcome of rates are going down.
Sure.
So fast forwarding to 2024, what's interesting now is a lot of the banks that weren't lending at all in 23 are starting to open back up. So a handful of these lenders that, for many years were our go-to that weren't lending at all last year, now they're, reaching out to us. Now we're having lunches with them. Now we're, having them size up deals again, which is great.
Good.
But it's very strange. I have this bifurcation. What I'm seeing is on the low end, rates high fives from some of these groups if they like the deal. The problem is not every deal is going to be a fit for every lender. On the other extreme, I'm still seeing certain lenders hanging. I got a quote at 7.75% yesterday.
Wow.
So a huge spread. A few years ago, it was like, hey, are you going to get a rate at 3.5 or 3 3/4? Like the spread was very tight. Now we're seeing a very wide range of cost of capital.
And do you think a big factor of that is going to be the volume of competition, or rather the volume of lenders in the market? Right, as we start seeing more lenders in the market, we'll start seeing that margin between different lenders start to shrink.
I hope so. I think the driving force behind it is the internal cost of funds of the banks. So what's happened, if you're not borrowing at the SOFR rate essentially, which is pretty high, or off the treasury, then a lot of your source of capital is coming from borrower deposits.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, what's also happening is 1-year CD is like 5%. So a lot of these, regional banks and community banks that were the lifeline last year for customers, that I think, if they weren't there, last year would have been really bad. So
sure,
they really stepped up as an industry and helped, build those relationships with local customers. But their cost of funds, because they had to give a decent yield to their clients, to their members, 5 to 5.5. I mean, a 1-year CD is 5% right now. So a lot of these regional banks, their cost of funds is 5.5%. So, a 7.5% rate is only a 2% profit margin to the bank.
Yep.
And a 2% yield has historically been considered very lean. Normally it's 2.5 to 3% is what these commercial lenders like to run at. And so, a lot of these regional and community banks are a little stuck right now. So I don't think they can go much lower than 7.5% in a lot of cases. So again, now we're looking at the lenders coming back into the market that securitize their debt. Well, that obviously their cost of borrowing is more real time. There's not the delay factor of what are you paying your depository relationships, but rather what's the market securitizing debt at. And so they're able to now take advantage of rate drops more. So I think there's going to continue to be a bifurcation over this year of lenders that are stuck to having to lend out deposits versus securitized type lenders. And I think that's going to persist for a little bit until the market normalizes. So the challenge there is going to be, I think, customer expectations. Everyone's going to see the shiny rate on the wall of 5%. Why am I not getting that? Well, the problem is those lenders and their underwriting criteria are very specific.
Yep.
So they might only want to do, it can be specific as I'll only do multifamily deals that were built, after 1990. And those are the ones that'll fit into our niche.
Yep.
Well, what happens if you're an owner-occupied, business? What happens if you're, an industrial, let's say you're an HVAC company that has an industrial warehouse and you have lots of cash flow, but you're not in that niche. And so that's where the challenge is going to be the alignment between the lender that is well suited for your type of product. And then the question is where do they source their capital? And that's going to drive, I believe, their rate, their pricing, because banks just can't lend, at 5.9 when their cost of funds is 5.5. Right. You can't afford to pay your staff to service the loan. So that's the pickle that everyone's in, and it's really a shame. It's a byproduct of the rapid pace of the Fed raising rates last year, which, I know going from 3% to where we're at now doesn't seem like much compared to, like, let's say the 70s. But because interest rates were so low, the percentage change was actually the most rapid rising rates in U.S. history. Because if you go from dang near 0% to 5%, that's a 500% rate of change in a very short time frame. Whereas if you go from 10% to 20%, that's only a 200% change. So the relative percent change of interest was very, very high, and it happened so quickly. That's why the banks got into trouble, is they didn't have time to adapt. And it's, people also don't realize, because the Fed did a really good job stepping in and kind of salvaging the situation, but it was a larger default from those three big banks than we had from all of the banks' failures in 2009
combined.
So last year, that was actually the biggest U.S. bank failure in U.S. history.
Wow.
People don't realize that. They handled it much better this time.
Yeah.
They stepped in so quickly and they honored those deposits that the news cycle just fizzled down. Good for them handling it well. But still, we shouldn't forget that was the largest U.S. bank failure in U.S. history. That's not insane. Nothing.
No, it's not.
There's still going to be, that's still an issue. And how do they solve it? They printed money. So it's kind of, on one hand, they're talking about us having to raise rates because of inflation, but then on the other hand, they resolved the issue of bank failures by creating more inflation,
more money.
So exactly. Like it's, I love how they love. I'm digressing, but it just cracks me up how they love to blame all these issues, supply chain and this and that. And, it's a very simple economics. It's like you print more dollars, the relative purchasing power goes down. It's, if you want inflation to truly slow down, stop printing so much money.
Stop printing.
It is literally that simple. But they don't want to make it that simple, because otherwise they would have to be accountable to taxpayers, right? I mean, it's kind of it's unpopular to vote for tax increases, but it's easy to print more money and go do what you want with the money. And then it cascades through the market as inflation. Yep. And which is essentially a tax on all the people. So I didn't want to get political here, but it's interesting that the monetary policy ends up, I think one of the biggest factors that we all have zero control over is what the Fed does. And it absolutely affects the landscape of everything. So, and the whole reason we had the inflation crisis was how many dollars they were printing for everything. Trillions of dollars going over there for the, Ukraine and everything else. And, from the bailout of 2009, and that's continued to grow for the new bailout last year. So again, I don't think inflation is going to truly stop as long as I keep printing money.
100%.
I think one reason they're rolling back the rates is they're in this pickle where they know they need to set the banks up for some level of success to actually service the debt. Otherwise, the whole problem they were trying to avoid is going to open back up. So for that reason, I think, rates are going down next year. Also, it's an election year, so they want the general public sentiment to be a little more positive.
Yep.
But so I can't say for sure how long rates are going to be reasonable, but I think this year is a window of opportunity to recapitalize debt at decent prices. And then after that, who knows? They might not have a choice. If we end up having super high inflation again, they may have to jump back into a rate raising environment. We'll have to see how that develops. But the good news is I think there is going to be the window of opportunity this year.
Well, I know we're buying, we're continuing to buy and look for multifamily, and it's, the debt situation is difficult, but working with partners like yourselves is fantastic. We love it. And that's the only way that we can get deals done.
Yeah.
We're at time. I want to jump in real quick to our triple threat for the week, where we talk about what we do physically, mentally, and financially, and how we keep those in check from a guest perspective. Would love to hear, Nick, what you do physically to stay fit, what you do mentally to stay agile, and what is your end goal from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, well, I have a 6-year-old boy who's super energetic, so keeping up with him is pretty much my fitness. He's gotten really into bike riding, and We live in a neighborhood here with tons of trails. So I've been doing a lot of bike riding lately, which is fun for me. It reminds me of being a kid and fun for him. So that's been the current activity of choice. In terms of agility, honestly, I think being in the industry that we're in, it just keeps you sharp because
Sure.
you got to be, and every transaction is different. Every customer profile is different.
Right.
And so even though financing sounds repetitive, it's really not, because every borrower, every situation is so unique. It gives you a window of understanding these unique industries. So I find that exciting, learning all about, hey, how does a dental office operate? How does an industrial warehouse operate?
Yeah,
How does a
we didn't
multifamily
even get into
operator
your
operate?
surgical center.
Yeah, and then of course managing, the surgery center that I own, and so it's really interesting learning the niches of how differently each of these asset classes are managed and run, and so I find that quite fascinating, and I enjoy it. So
Love it.
I think that keeps me pretty sharp. I've also always been a fan of documentaries, so I'll just fall asleep learning about random stuff. So if we ever go out to trivia night, we'll have to have a drink, and I'll have lots of random factoids for everybody that are probably useless most of the time. So
Love it.
What was the last one? Oh, financial goals.
Yeah. Are you designing a lifestyle? What are you working towards?
Yeah. So, thankfully we've been blessed enough that, with the family investment outside of Bellevue Capital, we've gained a degree of financial freedom. It's allowed my dad and mom to retire comfortably.
Nice.
So that, they've already hit that goal, and my brother and myself are, half to 3/4 there, so we're already doing pretty well with that project. But I think it's, as you evolve and grow, your horizon changes.
Yep.
Now my vision is, what kind of future can I help build for my son and his family? And I think a lot of people these days can feel a sense of hopelessness, going through school and watching the news cycle. And I don't want my son to have to go through that experience in life. And I think by choosing to create your own destiny, doing your own investments, creating your own reality, you can create that opportunity of, like, there's something for him. I want to leave a legacy behind where,
yep.
There's enough passive cash flow that he has freedom. To me, it's like, it's not about money per se. It's about what money can offer you, and it can offer you freedom. Yep. Where you don't feel trapped in doing some careers that you hate. It offers you the ability to live a life of purpose. And sure. I want to be able to create that foundation for his generation. Because unfortunately, I don't know, I think a lot of kids these days are feeling very hopeless. And I think real estate and entrepreneurship is one of the few places left where you can truly change your destiny and you can take control of that. Like, sure, it might be hard work, but it's worth it to create, it's possible. It's a mechanism that there's not a lot of other spaces. Not everyone's going to be a software genius. Not everyone's going to be a Class A surgeon. So it's like, well, what for the rest of us, the other 90%, 95% of us, what is there that we can do that can change our destiny? And in my opinion, it's real estate.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, anyway. I love that. I think the obviously the most limited resource we have is not money, it's time. And if you can provide the ability for, your son and his eventual family to be outside of time, or rather have ample time, because you're not having to grind on a corporate job or whatever it happens to be, because you've done all the work, you've set them up. I think obviously that gets them the most valuable resource, which is time. So I think that's perfect.
To then choose to live a life of purpose, maybe, who knows, maybe invent something cool, but
I love it.
He loves to build things right now. So, but it's, again, it's kind of, my view of money has changed. It's now about creating freedom and happiness. So
love it. Well, good stuff, Nick. I appreciate your time. Where can folks get in contact with you?
Yeah, Bellevue Capital Group. My direct line, you can always reach out, 360-509-4002, or shoot me an email. Again, I'm Chief Operating Officer here at Bellevue Capital Group, and I'm always happy to help customers. It's good, bad, or ugly. I'll always tell you the truth, and I believe that sometimes that means I'll tell you that we're not the best solution, or maybe you shouldn't even buy that property, which I know is not always popular, but I've found that by being that honest with people, that they later on they come back to you with a deal that does make sense and is good for them. But
Right.
a lot of times people are afraid to tell people the bad news, and I'd much rather have that honest conversation up front because in the end it will help the customer more than just trying to get a deal closed, right? So
Makes sense. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, appreciate you. Thanks for joining. And again, appreciate your time. I think this has been obviously very eye-opening. I'm looking forward to the 2024 outlook and looking forward to closing some deals together. Again, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic show, CRE Playbook, your stop for deals, strategies, and tactics. Thanks, Nick. Take care.
Take care. Thanks, Carl.
Bye.